From the studios of Blackwater Media in the city of Atlanta, I'm your host, Dr. William Lester, and I'd like to welcome you to Trek Talk. Now, what is this all about? Well, this all stems from my love and enjoyment of Star Trek in most of its manifestations. And I thought it would be fun and entertaining to do a podcast where I talk about Star Trek. And it's a very open-ended thing. And I want the listeners who may know more or less about Star Trek, because that's one of the things, it's like everybody knows about it. Everybody's heard of it. But you find devotees and fans and aficionados all along the spectrum, from casual fans to intermediate to outright absolute Star Trek. I don't want to use the word fanatic, but it can become engrossing, can it? So I want to start with myself, and maybe if some of you out there had a similar kind of evolution with Star Trek, I'd certainly like to hear about it. By the way, anytime you want any kind of questions or issues related to Star Trek talked about on this podcast, shoot me an email at drlester@blackwatermedia.net, and I'll talk about it on the show. So let me go way back to a kid, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. It seemed like Star Trek was on all the time. And, I don't know whether that's kind of the hazy, rose-colored glass of long ago boyhood, but it was on. And it's funny because you go over to a friend's house and they were watching it. You go over to your grandmother's house and it's on over there. So it was very much kind of an omnipresent show. Now, at that time, I just kind of looked at it as science fiction, action, adventure. I love those aspects. And it's an hour-long show, and it's a lot to ask a 6-year-old. Even for an exciting show, I was just bouncing around. You play for a little while, and you look back up, and there's another scene or whatever. I didn't really know what was all involved. It was just a very colorful. And by the way, also, if you're old enough to have lived through the transition of black and white to color TV, it was a very colorful, active show. And so that was appealing too. But it was only later, as a young adult, when I started absorbing all of the little elements, the Federation, Starfleet. What's the difference? Starfleet is an arm of the Federation, and they're on this 5-year mission, and there are alien races that and new ones that you will encounter. And then, because we had Mr. Spock on the Enterprise, of course, and you realize, well, the Federation's made up of many different planets, and so the Federation and Starfleet are multiracial organizations with people from various member planets. The large number, of course, being human. And all of these things started coalescing. And then I realized something else about Star Trek. That era of human history really appealed to me. And the reason is that most of the things, in my view, that cause us trouble and problems, throughout, human history, in that era, most of those have been eliminated. Now, it's still not a perfect place, but they have different kinds of issues. And even more than that, the kind of people that cause the problems that we have now, for example, in that era either don't exist or have been marginalized to the point where they have no real access to power and influence. And that really appealed to me. Because, of course, our problems are man-made, as JFK once said. But that means they can be solved by man. I was also struck by how much we achieved and how much we accomplished and how much human suffering ended with this explosive advancement of technology. No more wars on Earth, poverty, hunger, and what have you. And at least in terms of the Federation, you had no more science deniers, right? The Earth's not flat. The moon is not made of whatever, sawdust or feta cheese. It was this incredible explosion of the scientific literacy of mankind. So these were some of the things that attracted me to Star Trek, and still do. One of the things I've always liked about Star Trek is that it presents a hopeful future for humanity. At least, I hope that it is somewhat representative of what our future will be. But of course, that's up to us. And also to a degree contingent upon when and where and how we make first contact with intelligent extraterrestrial civilizations. But it is a hopeful future. So on this podcast, we're going to try to explore all of these, and I want to have fun with it, but I'm not going to let it degenerate down into just abject silliness. But it's certainly interesting. It's certainly fun. And I want to explore a lot of these aspects of Star Trek with you. I'm probably going to tend to focus on the original series and the animated series because of the obvious continuity. But also, I want to look at Enterprise, because the great thing about the Enterprise series is that it fills in so many gaps about what went on with Earth and the development of Starfleet and the eventual development and coalescing of the Federation, and how you come to meet the Andorians, for example, or the Tellarites. Because I know that when Enterprise begins, we've already been kind of working with the Vulcans, and there's this whole kind of back and forth tension at that time, because the Vulcans at that point have a higher degree of technology, and they're very wary, perhaps because of human history, they're very wary about us getting out there doing interstellar exploration. But the show just fills in so many gaps. I also want to touch on, from time to time, the Axanar film. And I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with this, but the Axanar film deals with an issue that I have always wanted to delve into. As you know, when the original series begins, there's already tension and conflict between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. And of course, we see situations with the Klingons even in Enterprise, which of course is an earlier time period. But there's still no rock solid, tangible information about how these hostilities were initiated. Well, the Axanar film covers that very issue, what they call the 4 Years' War, which was just out and out armed conflict between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. And it's a very exciting thing. And it's so ironic because, like I said, this was something that I would love to have seen the gaps filled in on perhaps some of the movies. Now, of course, there will be certain elements that I want to talk about with regards to The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Because again, this is still the Star Trek universe, and we're looking at the whole thing along this big timeline. And we can get into some of the great story arcs, particularly with DS9. I think the Dominion War story arc was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the Best of Both Worlds story arc dealing with the Borg on The Next Generation, and so on and so forth. The Xindi War story arc, a long story arc on Enterprise, was similarly exciting and enjoyable, and you really see Starfleet ultimately successfully coping with its first really big, menacing threat. So these are some of the areas that I want to explore with you. Now, like I said, I'm just one person, so there's always something I might skip over or overlook or forget. So are any aspects of what I've been talking about that I have kind of trailed off on, shoot me a message at drlester@blackwatermedia.net, and I'll take the best of those and bring them up on this show. And all of your ideas, your thoughts, your kind of critique is welcome. And so let's have fun with this. It's one of the things I've enjoyed in my life. Even the Star Trek books, particularly those that dealt with these issues, dealt with, conflicts with the Romulans, and how the intrigue in coping with their cloaking device technology, and the connection between the Vulcans and the Romulans, and all of these things, the various enemy alien races. So I just wanted to do this initial show to kind of break the ice and let you know what's going on, give you a preview of what's coming. And I hope you guys enjoy it. And until next time, live long and prosper.